This is Frank Tackie's take. A question that is bugging my mind for a while is, why do we find ourselves in our towns and cities? It's been so messy. It is getting worse and worse by the day. My name is Frank Tackie. I'm the CEO of the Consortium, a consulting firm of architects, town planners and engineers, and the past president of the Ghana Institute of Planners. So this is going to be my take for the day. Okay, so you're welcome. On my immediate left, Mr. Magnus Kwashi, the immediate president of the Ghana Institute of Engineers. Next to him is Osei Kwame Agyemang, past president of the Ghana Institute of Architects. And myself, Mr. Frank Tackie, the CEO of the Consortium and also past president of the Ghana Institute of Planners. My take is on the urban mess in which we find ourselves, specifically looking at the issue of slums proliferation across our towns and cities and the uncontrollable urban sprawl. It's got beyond levels that we can manage. And if you were to ask me where does the buck stop, I think it's got to do with poor political leadership at all levels, central, regional, and at the very district levels. And we'll be diagnosing these issues over the next past few minutes. You're welcome. Now, I look at this issue of the urban menace and the crisis that we are facing. There are at least over 400, maybe by now 420, 50 urban centers in Ghana. There used to be only one iconic example, that is the Tema Township. That too has fallen back. So there's no single example of any workable, livable town or city in Ghana, regardless of the size, be it as small as a 5,000 population urban center or the mega cities of Accra and Kumasi. Nothing seems to be working. But one thing that stands out, which is so visible, is got to do with the issue of the slums proliferation and the sprawl. No matter how small the towns are, they're still sprawling. As you go around, you see a town that should be manageable, compact, is always sprawling and sprawling and sprawling. And I look at it and I put everything aside and say, if I was asked in very simple, clear terms, where does this thing stop? Who takes responsibility? And I think it's political leadership, both at the central level, at the regional level, and even at the district level. And that is where I start from. But I diagnose it much further, and I don't think we've understood the slum phenomenon over the years. I think there's a mismatch in the literature where people think squatters are the same as slums. Me and you know professionally that there's a distinction between slums vis-a-vis the squatter settlements. I see the squatter settlements as a very recent phenomenon in our urban vocabulary. I don't know how you see it from this perspective. Round?
Well, it's a bit complex, but it should be manageable. And we've come to this point because somehow I think we don't understand the essence of the city and how it evolves for everybody to play its proper role. Like you said, unfortunately, governance and the management of urban spaces is an issue for the state, much as the citizen also plays a role. But the predominant responsibility lies with the state. It goes without saying that there are cities that are far larger than us, Mumbai, Mexico City, Cairo, 20 million plus.
Yeah.
But the cities function.
Yeah.
Simply because those who manage the cities understand what it takes to manage the cities. And I dare say that our growth from probably 1940 to about 60 was managed because we could contain it from an administrative capital to a political capital and then eventually to a commercial capital. That's what I'm talking about, Accra. Beyond that, you need to manage the whole nation such that you don't put that much pressure on Accra, which is what is happening.
Yeah.
And every city provides opportunities. And so long as the opportunities, the citizens will look for those opportunities and take advantage of those opportunities. A typical example is Agbogboshi. Now, the slum, which is places that, you know, habitation that is not of the proper quality or the appropriate quality for human habitation, as against the squatters. And the slums have evolved because everyone in the city wants to take advantage of some opportunity for some enterprise, for which we have not planned for. And settlements or housing is only facilitating people's objectives. So in as much as they can get some accommodation, the main objective is what enterprise can I engage in. So you find all these makeshifts.
Are you looking at slums, like in this Accra context, taking things like the Sodom and Gomorrah, the Abuja as it's called, and the railway squatters around Agbogboshi and Neoplan, vis-a-vis the traditional core slums of areas like Choko, Jamestown? As far back as 1996, for example, with a World Bank study, in Accra alone, we came across 37. I mean, it's not got to do with the squatters. That is more like illegality. Yeah. But these are indigenous settlements that are run down, and there were as many as 37 in Accra alone, way back in 1996. Are you making that distinction?
Yes, the quality of life in even certain planned areas could be degraded to slums. But it is more manageable to upgrade them for human habitation because they are properly planned in one way or the other. The difficulty is in the areas where you have settlers, and then the township or the settlement is also a slum, where the quality of life is totally unacceptable. And in as much as there has been no planning, it is difficult to do any upgrading of some sort. Okay. And it is all because we have not taken into consideration what settlement planning is all about and why people move, the objective why people want to settle for a certain enterprise. We tend to be able to do planning for the more formal, identifiable sectors. Okay. And then where you have informal enterprise, there's absolutely no planning. So then they tend to fend for themselves, and it becomes a field for anybody who is capable.
So it's more like, if we don't plan for us, we plan for ourselves.
Precisely.
Magnus, you see it that way?
Well, evidently, I think that's the situation we find ourselves, you see. And I think I duly agree with you, clearly what you look at in terms of slums and then squatters. But the interesting thing is that if we allow the squatters, you know, to dwell in a place, you know, over several years, they almost turn into what we call a slum, because they have second generation children who come from where they were born, say let's say around the railway and so on and so forth. Okay, so we do indeed have a challenge. And I think basically we need to ask our people the issue of quality of life. What quality of life do we envisage for every Ghanaian? Probably as technocrats, it's easy, we may be desirous to put in place a plan and so on and so forth, but I think still the back stops with the leadership of the country. What kind of quality of life do we envisage for each and every Ghanaian? What kind of cities do we want? And I think we clearly must define these things to help shape up how we build an inclusive city and take care of even places that are run down. Again, so for example, I'll say Tema. You mentioned Tema. I think gradually parts of Tema has grown into a slum because we have not managed it.
Large parts.
Yes, and sometimes we think that once you have a city, you have people living in a place. That is it. But a city must be managed, and that's why, of course, we do have city managements. You have a city hall, you have that. But we have sat down for places like this Tema, such as an iconic city, to turn large part of it now has turned into a slum, unfortunately, and it's a big challenge. If you come to our capital, services are poor, transport arrangements are bad, and I don't know where we are heading.
So my worry in all of this, particularly with the squatters, is the phenomenon of squatter settlements in the literature of urban planning came mainly from Latin America and partly Asia. Yeah. And you see the concentric zone theory where squatters infiltrate from the rear. So they will be at the outskirts, at the periphery. Ours is the other way around. They start from the inner core to the extent where even where the seat of government is. If you go to the castle now, you'll be surprised to see that on your left of Osu Castle is a huge squatter settlement, almost competing with Sodom and Gomorrah, right in the center. If you go to the ministries, you find squatters are right in the ministries. So where did we go wrong to allow such infiltration? Because it defies logic, because they are squatting at the outskirts. There's no eye on them. So what would be the reason why ours should be so exceptional? It's more difficult to manage when they infiltrate right into the center, because here you are dealing with how do you resettle or relocate them? How do you manage them? If they are the periphery, they are contained and probably they are regularized. Are you going to regularize the Sodom and Gomorrah, and therefore by logic any other squatter settlement in the center, Abuja near the road, near the CNB area, where the land value is so high in the city, where there's so much land scarcity?
Well, so long as there's a relationship between my habitation and my enterprise, it is difficult to ignore. And in those areas where the squatters or the settlements are on the periphery, within that periphery, there's opportunity for survival.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, with Accra, for example, that opportunity exists right in the center of town. And so there must be a relationship between where I settle and where I practice my enterprise. And to the extent that a lot of the enterprise in Accra is commerce, and to some extent small-scale industries, and I can settle here, and within 10 square meters, I can operate whatever I want to do, whether I'm a vulcanizer, or I'm a steel bender, or a carpenter, or whatever. Okay? And in as much as planning, regulating, and enforcing laws don't happen, then it suits me to be anywhere. And if you take it right from the food vendor to the small-scale industrialists, habitation is a very important aspect of this kind of slum situation. He hardly has any transport costs. He hardly moves anywhere. He hardly has any sanitation costs, because he uses his immediate environment for whatever. Okay, and so it suits him to a large extent to be within reach of his enterprise. And in situations where we have lots of urban spaces that are not planned, that is almost like no man's land, you're bound to find settlers in those places. And since we haven't planned for it, they plan for themselves.
So now, Magnus, let's look at the problem in a dichotomy. The external related factors, which are not physical, not to do with the specific location of the slum dweller, things like a national urban policy, issues like the urban economy. I mean, clearly, I don't know whether you agree, but anytime I get to that topic of slums and squatter settlements, I do not look at the physical content, because you can actually take all the dwellers in Sodom and Gomorrah and put them in 4-bedroom air-conditioned apartments, and you go back after 2 years, I'm surprised if they are back to square one. So the issue is not the hardware, but the software. The economic base, the social status, lack of education, access to health, and so on. So do you see it in the same way as I see that we are not, we try to oversimplify it and all the time look at the immediate content, the physical. Their buildings are ugly and they have to be upgraded, and then we leave out who lives in it. And I think is the person who lives in it is a slum more than the environment. But even though they are related, I would take one before the other. Would you share that as well?
No. Well, I cannot agree with you more. You see, we cannot really divulge the soft issues, from the physical, because if the person has a certain level of expectation and so on, it does affect the environment in which you put him. I mean, like you said, if some people, no matter the consequences, if you put them in 4 bedrooms and so on, probably after 2 years you go, it will be different. Other people, I'm hoping that would have had a certain change of mindset. So we do need to help probably urban dwellers, whether you live in a slum or whatever, to have an appreciation in the environment in which we live. The issue about who we are, what we need to do, how we go about things and so on and so forth are all parts of the things we need to do. I mean, I don't want to dwell so much on education because in the past, many people, a lot of people, probably our parents, not all of them were educated, but they were very conscious at making sure that the environment and so on were said that they could. But of course, there were some other regulation and so on and so forth. But over time, I think there has been lax with regulation, you know. No matter what, people may be educated, but if you allow them, I mean, if you go today also to some of the areas where people can afford even to build 3-bedroom, 4-bedroom, for many people, their immediate confines is what concerns them. People are dumping refuse along the motorway. People are dumping refuse. Immediately they leave the four corners of their wall and so on. So there's a certain level of knowledge and again appreciation, maybe, and some kind of respect one for another and so on. And these are soft issues I believe we need to start promoting as a people. You know, a kind of a self-awareness, self-actualization, you know, responsibility towards one another and so on. I believe that are all ingredients of urban planning and community development, which I believe that we should start engaging the public seriously. You know,
okay, so we'll take a short break at this stage. We'll come back and move into the second gear of our discussion. Okay, so this is Frank Tackie's take, and you're welcome back. So if we're moving closer and closer, I take 4 core issues that are external. The economy. If the national economy was alive and kicking, if you take a place like China, if we were into industrialization and producing, not into buying and selling, for example, what you find in a typical environment of these slum dwellers is hostels around which you have an industrial enclave producing. So this is very easy to manage the same low-income people, but it's linked to the structure of the economy. And I think the structure of the economy has, by and large, dictated what we are seeing, the weakness and the structure of the economy itself. I look at infrastructure, particularly your area of transportation. A city with mobility gives you job mobility and residential mobility. So you're not confined, like Round said, to want to work around your environment. Because I live at Kaulegono, I have to find space. But if there was mobility and I could just pick a train and within 10 minutes I am at Ofanko or whatever it is, crossover, that kind of mobility, you know, will probably help. So these are external issues. The whole issue of infrastructure in a city where, whether you live in airport or Aguguloshi, you have a water deficit. Whether you are at Oxford Street, there's still water shortage and tanker service. So you see tankers crossing the whole. Now, that is a certain equalizer and a leverage in city development. Access to social services. If you lived somewhere in probably Waja in the slums there, you had an accident. If the nearest point of call will be to go through all the traffic, you're going to go to Kolebu. You don't have anything. So these are the external issues that I think we need now to look. How do we leverage an economic platform that will help these people, their infrastructure, transportation needs, low income, low cost transportation infrastructure, social services, and then the whole governance issue. I mean, like Round said, you said that we run the city as if I am a city dweller. I have no clue what the plan of the city is. What the mayor, I only hear the mayor saying things as if it's take it or leave it situation. But in governance, in city planning, it's a two-way. You know, the government and the governing. So at least the most is kind of exchange, where there's maybe a city forum where at least I know what you're going to do in Kaulegono. I agree and I move along with it. So what you're saying is not quite as if they don't. But I'm not part of the city plan. The planning is done top down. Somebody sits up there and he says, from tomorrow going, there'll be this, and thou shalt not, thou shalt do this kind of thing. So well, I'm not part of it. These are the 4 broad areas that I think we should. You have any that you want to add?
Yeah, you know, for some reason, we think the economy is separate from the physical environment. For some reason, we see the economy as something
hanging in the air there.
Some dimension that we can handle without handling the physical environment, and that is the biggest flaw, because a decision to what we aspire as a nation comes from within our environment. We totally ignore that environment and somehow expect some miracles to happen. Okay, so you talk about infrastructure, you talk about mobility, you talk about access to services, education, health, all these issues which make our environment work, can't work, and for that matter, we have deficits in our economy. Again, we don't have purpose of progress. We don't have a purpose of growth. Everything seems to be ad hoc, and we just go along so long as there's some comfort zone. Okay, and even when we get the step as recent as the petrol crisis, we take it as, well, it's probably part of our national psyche and we can get over it, and but to a large extent, you need to have a purpose for the city and translate the whole nation. I find it extremely disappointing that in this day and age, the markets, central market in Accra, central market in Kumasi, central market in Tamale, and central market in Takrady, which is the cause of all our problems, is still the center of the city.
Yeah.
Now, markets have grown over ages. I mean, markets in 16th century England is still what we are practicing.
Yeah.
And it doesn't occur to us that those markets alone are the cause of 1,001 problems in the urban setting. Yeah. And yet, we want to be able to have growth in the economy without recognizing that the physical setup, makes it impossible. The point you make about mobility, we've grown a city where probably just about 30% is well serviced, and therefore land prices shoot up. It's basically a principle of demand and supply. And like you rightly said, if you could live in Dodowa, work at Ministry of Health, get a train at 8 a.m. and be at Ministry of Health at 8:30, why do you want to go and chase land in cantonments? Transportation alone makes a lot of difference. But, we don't see the economy from that perspective.
No.
And I'm not too sure what kind of economy we are looking at, because it is the people, the enterprises that they're engaging is what makes the economy. And if those enterprises cannot happen in an efficient environment, then you really don't have an economy. And certainly we don't have a purpose as a nation. We don't have ownership of what kind of growth or where we want to go to.
Magnus, I'm sure you are itching to hit on your transportation. You like talking about the cost of congestion and the impact of mobility cost to the low income earner, who probably might spend about 30% or 40% of his real income.
Well, it's actually about 50%, for a low income earner, commuting to and from what he wants to do, and so on and so forth. Okay, but I want to reiterate something that you have just said. I think we need to go back to the basics and ask ourselves what kind of quality of life we anticipate for each Ghanaian, because you then have to think again about access. I mean, how far do you want children to walk or to travel to get to school? How far do you want your citizens to access goods and services? Okay, and the other thing you said, I mean, why would somebody travel all the way, maybe from Dodowa, to come to work in Accra and so on, or to come to hospital? You see, so it's all about the issue of access. Okay, so once we talk about mobility and we talk about access to services. If a typical Ghanaian can access all the basic activities that he does in the day, I mean, why does he need to do long commutes? And it's quite painful that today we see that the city is growing, sprawling and so on, and people are traveling as far from Mampong to come to the city center. I mean, this evening you ask yourself, why is there so much traffic around this area? Because we have all closed at the same time. People are driving back home at the same time, and many things. And it's bizarre again. So you begin to ask yourself, who have been appointed to manage a city, and sometimes people think that, well, it's enough to come talk about one grandiose project and another, but we need to almost always be questioning ourselves, maybe as city managers, how are the people living in my city accessing services, goods and services? And this should guide us, you know, from time to time to help us, as it were, to dynamically actually look at how we do these things. It's painful.
But
Sometimes
so we as professionals, assuming we agree that the buck stops with political leadership, we do have a role. Have we got to grips with the issue of planning for the poor, designing for the poor, planning, architecture, engineering for the poor?
We have. To a large extent, I think we have a concern. We have a capacity. What we haven't done is to translate it into reality. Okay, that I agree with you. And to a large extent, there's a lot of talk, and I keep saying that we need to be able to translate this talk into what I call knowledge management. The knowledge that we have to be able to provide solutions, we must manage it in such a way that it actually translates into those solutions.
Does it still fit into political leadership that somebody has to trigger, somebody has to pull the trigger and say, okay, you guys, I challenge you to do A, B, C, D, and produce some results, and that probably will facilitate entry of professionals into a non-profitable venture like dealing with the poor?
But Frank, you see, I think at this stage in our development, we'll beg to say that we probably don't need to again wait for somebody to say that, let's go do this. I think we also must take the initiative probably of trying to indicate or show how these things can be done. Because sometimes I also think that we must take part of the blame as professionals. You know, because if somebody is appointed in AYZ assembly, then he appears, he says, oh, I want this, I want this. You know, and sometimes too often we don't give him a clue what can be done. You know, and I believe that as professionals, we also need to be ahead of what probably the ordinary citizens are thinking and so on, so that we can readily provide the solution. But too often we don't. And again, today, people are tired of the talking. They want to see things. We have the capability, we have the capacity to actually help people appreciate in 3 dimensions.
But Ron and I can easily professionally solve the problem of the market he's talking about in Accra Central, relocating. We know the problem. We know that we have to relocate the food bulk breaking centers around Agbogbulushi. They attract so much heavy traffic. We know that we have to relocate the timber market. It's been there ages. But we don't have that mandate. I mean, okay, so tomorrow morning I go and look for land at Awoshi or wherever, and I get land. On what authority? Act 462 tells you emphatically that when it comes to markets, the things that make the city choke, markets, lorry parks as we call them, slaughterhouse, refuse collection, it's so emphatically written in law that it belongs to the assembly. So on what basis can Ron and I, with whatever ingenuity we have to design a bulk breaking market that will not attract Kayaye and so on? There's so much easy access. You can park your cars and so. But who has that mandate?
Well, the point is that I mean, we have no doubt we can put this, but too often we have engaged probably the political leadership. The citizens do not even know, and that's why the citizens are always saying, "Where are the professionals?" So I think it's about time this time to help the citizens also appreciate what can be done, so that the citizens can also begin to be part of the engagement. Because let me give you an example. You know, there's flooding in the capital. Okay, and sometimes the political leadership shy away from talking about it because he wants votes. You see, but how often have we professionals engaged let's say the citizenry? You know, I go to a place and tell them and help them to appreciate that, look, you are living or residing in Glife, which is supposed to collect or retain water, you know, so that I tell all the people around that the problem you are having with floods is because some people live in Glife, so that we begin to discuss this among citizens. Because I've seen this in India, where, for example, the government has increased the fuel price in India, but the let's see, the vendors have discussed with the people who buy that they can't afford the price, and they have changed the price and left the government out. You know, and I think that it's difficult, but we must start gradually helping the ordinary citizen to become aware of himself and so on. Because too often we have beautiful plans and all the nice things we do and so on. Ask me how many people in the public have privy and even know that we can do things like this publicly.
But no, but that's precisely where the political leadership comes under question at the local level. A good example is Tackie, when I was with the master plan, and then you ask each of the assemblymen, can you show me where we can have a forum for the area of your control so that we discuss with the people what their priorities are. Let us be sure that we don't come from Accra and tell them that you need, so let us have. The first thing, to my surprise, is even the assemblyman doesn't even have a forum, a place. So I ask, where did you stand to canvass for your votes to be elected? Then I go ahead and tell you, okay, now you go back, look for a church, a mosque, or a school, and let's adopt that as from now on, that will be your rallying point, so that there's always a forum. When we say that we of this zone, we are meeting, everybody knows that the meeting place is always this school. Now, if I prepare the plan, I'm coming to sit in this same school. Anybody who wants to participate should come in and let's dialogue on it. Whichever mayor, which mayor does this, you understand? So this example you are given, that is what true planning should be.
Exactly.
Down,
Bottom
up. Right? We don't practice that. All you hear is that a mayor has come on the radio and say that from tomorrow we are going to do this, from tomorrow we are going to do that, that kind of. So it's still the top down and there's no participation. And I don't know whether you think the acquiescence of the public, you know, or their ignorance, gullibility, whatever you call it, is also part of the problem.
Well, you know,
I mean, you drive around and you look at, say, take Osu for example, look at around the Duncan's area and look at the structures that are coming up. I mean, it's so frightening, and it looks the whole of the Osu old settlement, looking at people's houses and so on, and yet there was no public forum where they could have discussed, and it's like take it or leave it, and you see the thing coming up. Is it acquiescence?
It's become a convention, I guess. Take our political history and you realize that to a large extent we have allowed those who believe capable to govern. There must have been a point, or there has been a point in time where those we believed could govern have totally failed us, but the citizenry never came on board to make sure that things went right. Now it's gone so bad, the citizens have just decided that, look, things will hardly change. We can never be part of this process, so let me manage my corner. And so we have 1,001 corners discussing the same issue. There's no galvanizing of effort to make sure that those issues translate into a better life for us. So to a large extent, you know, the political system and the governance is part of it. And I can assure you that we would hardly have development beyond 3 years. Because our political system, our political timetable is 4 years. Okay, and for that matter, governance, development, and everything we do is power-centered instead of people-centered.
So, but there have been a few examples where attempts have been made, not a few, very, very few. In fact, to my living memory, the only one I know of where slums have been tackled is in the World Bank Urban 4.
Yeah.
We took part in it there. That's in 1995, 96. Upgrading of low-income communities. They were in Accra. Out of the 37, because the World Bank driven, you know, and again, it brings it back to the donor-driven agenda. So here comes a bunch of World Bank guys, and they come and tell you, we're going to do Urban 4, and we're going to upgrade your slum communities. Then the phase 1, we go around and we identify 37 communities, giving the criteria of what a slum is. And then they go back to Washington and come back and say, okay, out of the 37, we'll do 3. West Mamobi, Sukura, and Old Teshi. And they just ended at these 3. Okay, out of 37, 3. And somebody, a minister signs onto this and approves 3 out of 37. What is the impact? And in this 3 itself, the terms of reference was street lighting,
Drainage.
Major public drains in there, primary drains, street lighting, public toilets, and streets, but access roads limited to about, I think, 3 or 4 kilometers. It had no transportation impact. But no matter even how small it was, when we did that impact analysis after 7 years, 8 years, at least we noticed that there had been some improvement. For example, in Tackie, a laundry had suddenly moved in because of the street lights and so on, because of the drain. So it means that if there was a concerted effort, slums can be upgraded, with a minimal effort. Even though you're not tackling the macro problems, at the micro level, there's evidence that if you do something like this, it shows some transformation. But with the exit of the World Bank on that project, nothing has happened. So we are back to square one, doing nothing as an option of development.
You see, so the question comes back. What do we want for our people? Should we always be told what we need? And that is something we need to address first and foremost as Ghanaians. You did mention a minister signing 3. He didn't even ask. I mean, assuming there was opportunity to do 10, he probably didn't ask, why are you doing 3? Okay, if you have money to do 3 and we can't do 10, take your money away and things like that. So
well, no, I mean, in countries that have moved forward, if it was in Malaysia,
yeah,
in India, when you get in there, they do what we call the upstream investment. So you prepare the plan. So when the World Bank guys come, we tell them we have this plan for Accra. In Accra, we have identified 37 slum communities, and this is our agenda. We don't have funds for all. You want to participate, you can plug in, and we can give you a package to run along with. But ours is the reverse. The donor communities come in and do the upstream thing for us. So therefore, they take the thing into their own hands and they do some little plan out of it. But if we, like I said, we had a plan, or even the Accra alone had a comprehensive plan that we're going to follow. When you come in, whether you are AFD, whether you are World Bank, whether you are Japanese, you just plug in as and when, and you move on. But in the absence of any plan, whatever you bring and throw at them, they are so desperate. If it's just do 2 public toilets, you see on the front page, some agency donates 2 public toilets to AMB, and then there's a big ceremony to clap over it. So it comes back to what I said from the beginning. My take is it's a governance issue, and I think if we are to run up this section and put 4 major issues that will move the agenda forward on slums, how would you handle that around?
Well, we need to be able to untangle that governance issue. Because you see, the point you made about the minister signing, political authority tends to be concentrated in one mind. When that one mind is incompetent, the country has a problem. But if you look at the issues we have against, say, the mega projects, a project with a specific budget, specific objectives, done within specific time by a Ghanaian authority, means that there's nothing complex that we cannot deal with. But then, of course, we need to have a certain level, a certain amount of ownership of what we want. And like Magnus keeps saying, what exactly do we want? We don't know what we want. And we keep living ad hoc on a daily basis. And for some reason, those who control the puppets with the political authority will determine what happens. And until such time that the citizens become a part of that process, which I'm still trying to find how we do that, because I've mentioned how the political process and the will to do things completely divert from the citizenry. The citizenry now is comfortable with what is it that we can. If you look at the recent petrol crisis, everybody was more interested in how do I get fuel for my car than finding out what has really caused this and how do we prevent it. Now it's virtually over because now we're satisfied and we're not interested. Okay, so to some extent, it's like we still need to look up to something to be able to progress. And if that something is incapable, we're in trouble, which is where we are. Let me just throw this in that, talking about what is it that we want, I've always asked the question that if we consider utilities as public infrastructure and roads as public infrastructure, can we ask the question that in 5 years, will Wi-Fi be part of the infrastructure? Because it has the capacity to move the economy into various dimensions. But the thinking is not even there. So we even lack the sense of direction as to what it is that we can do within the city. And it's all a governance issue. We somehow can't translate that mandate and all the knowledge that we have into better life for the people.
Magnus, what do we don't say on that one?
Well, of course, I agree to some of the things you have said already. And again, the issue of clearly having a national plan, what we want to do to our cities and towns and so on, cannot be understated. The issue of governance, of course, I completely agree with you. That is a big challenge. You know, we will do our bit, but it does. I mean, sometimes you ask yourself, who is appointed where, why is the person appointed, and so on and so forth. You know, so it's also it's not just the ordinary citizen that is ignorant. Sometimes some of the people in leadership are more ignorant than the ordinary citizen. You see, so how can people like this believe? I mean, I have had opportunity to engage with several, let's say, chief executives and so on and so forth at a planning meeting, and some will tell you that, look, well, I'm not interested in long-term plans because even the person who put me there is looking for money. I have to go and find something to give that person. What is long-term plan and so on. So if you have people with such minds, if you have people with such attitude leading us, I mean, then where are we heading? It is indeed a pity, and I think that's the other area we need to look at. I really don't know whether voting for mayors or city district chief executives will help us, but I know, like in the Netherlands, they don't vote, but the people are there, they are articulate. But the system is that they ensure that there's competition among cities in the Netherlands, in Europe, and so people in leadership are desirous of providing a certain level of quality of life for the people who live there. So whether we vote, whether they are elected, I mean, it also has to do with the caliber of people and the appreciation of what city management is.
For me, about. I think in the sum it up, I think we've lost the battle with the planning for the low income and the informal economy, because it's a daily battle. Every single day, I think, as we sit down now, there's some infraction, either through a new kiosk that is being wrongly placed. There's a new arrival from outside Accra as an immigrant who is going to find space illegally somewhere. It's a daily thing. It's not monthly. And yet our response is a pretense of every 4 years somebody talks something about it. But the reality is that it's a daily, and it's, unless you have a daily battle to compete, it's like a football match where you sit back and after you've been scored 200 goals, you make an attempt to discuss it, that kind of thing. So clearly for me, I think it's a losing battle. Let's take another break and come back to now tackle urban sprawl and any other issue. Okay, so you're welcome back. This is Frank Tackie's take, still on the urban agenda, why our cities and towns are so much in a mess. So, gentlemen, let's continue. Now, I'm probably picking and choosing because we don't have the whole day. We could discuss this for a year. But then, equally striking is the issue of urban sprawl. I mean, way back when the Accra plan was prepared in 1992, clearly the boundaries of Accra was, you could hardly, there was nothing like Bawe, clearly. I remember the Malam, that's all forest areas. Spintex Road, it took about 10 minutes maximum from Tesano Sports Club, and you are into Spintex and back, that was really nothing happening anywhere. Today, Kaswa has been overtaken. I mean, you stand at Malam Junction and you saw the daily in and outs from Kaswa into Accra. I mean, it's frightening. The boundaries of Accra is no longer, but in Sawam, small chicken, Eburi has been overtaken already. Kumasi is following in that trend. A small town like Asante Mampong, I've been there for funerals. within a matter of 3-4 years, and then you see the sprawl. And one of the phenomena that I've noticed is the petrol filling stations. I think they are dictating the structure of our towns and cities in the sprawl. I've used the Accra Kumasi and Accra Cape, and I've just been monitoring over a period. And you just see, if you see one filling station overtaking the queue and moving ahead, around it, a few, 3, 4, 5 buildings will spring up. Then the next time you go, another filling station is picked up. But beyond that, it's frightening for city management. And I mean, the whole phenomenon of urban sprawl. I mean, to infrastructure, you know the cost per square per capita. I mean, we're making cost of delivering infrastructure so expensive per capita. You're making travel costs extremely expensive, you know, and we are creating so much pressure on urban land to the extent that there's apparent land scarcity. Whereas we know professionally that the whole of Accra, including Tema, all of that can be contained in about 1/3 of the size of the land area and still free so much land for urban agriculture, free so much land for recreational space, and spare the water bodies to refreshing. But we've created this mess, and I think these are all avoidable, you know. I don't know how you run particularly, you see I mean, I know you're concerned about that as well, and you've been talking, but
it is interesting that you talk about all these issues and you think about them, and you ask yourself, those who have the mandate and the capacity and the authority to make a difference, are they thinking that way? We will always come back to that, okay? And it then goes back to the point that, do we really know why, you know, as it were, we exist as a people and what it is that we want, you know? And unfortunate thing is, if you take Lagos, for example, who are now trying to implement their public transport system that they could have done in the 70s when they had all the capacity to do, it's equally going to cost us in 30 years' time to try and reverse all the damage that we are doing now, okay, for far more costs than we can achieve now. But nobody's thinking in that direction. Absolutely nobody. And it gets frightening because, like you said, the town is just sprawling. Everybody moves another kilometer further and expects the state to provide the utilities
and they
to
do
follow up.
They do.
And it becomes an extremely huge cost to the state. And at the point where the state cannot provide, but you see, as a people, even when you take the quality of education and you sprawl into areas where obviously you don't have that kind of quality of education or health to access for the people, it has an effect for the whole nation.
Yeah.
Eventually.
Yeah.
When you have situations where the people's health is at risk,
it's a cost to the nation.
It's a cost to the nation.
It's a cost to the economy.
So why are you not planning to prevent that? And I keep saying that we're so fond of curative situations rather than preventive situations.
Magnus, are you sharing?
No, I mean exactly. So we are still talking about what do we want. You see, because if we don't clearly define that, I think that that is what, because we haven't defined that, it is dictating the pace of urban sprawl. You see, so again, if a few of us could live here, because we live in an unregulated society and what have you, we begin to dot along a corridor, and what the same amount of resources that you will use to serve maybe 2,000 people, you have to deploy that same amount to serve 10 people, because we have decided to, and at the time you are spending the money, probably you shouldn't have done that.
I think you've hit it right on, and in a very. I think all far too soon. Our time is getting up. I probably presume we'll come back to this subject. It's not a story that we can exhaust in one discussion. This has been Frank Tackie's take. We've looked at the phenomenon of slums proliferation in our towns and cities. It's very frightening. It's almost at a point where it's an epidemic that seems to have more like is it called Ebola?
Yeah.
It's called the Ebola dimension.
Virus.
We haven't found the cure to the virus as yet, and it's still spreading And then we've looked at the urban sprawl issue as well, how the towns and cities are sprawling. I've been discussing this issue with my two comrades. We've been warriors on this frontier. On my immediate left, Mr. Magnus Kwashi, the president of the Ghana Institution of Engineers, and next to him is Mr. Osei Kwame Ajiman, the past president of the Ghana Institute of Architects. And my name is Frank Tackie. See you in the next program. Thank you.